let's talk about Pirates of Venus and Lost on Venus, the first two Venus novels, or Amtor novels, by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is his other planetary series. He most famously, of all things, most famously he probably actually wrote Tarzan, but most famously in space fantasy he wrote Barsoom, the Mars novels, John Carter of Mars. He also wrote Pellucidar, the Hollow World. And this is his less known. I think there might be another planetary thing. I'm trying to think. Maybe it's a standalone. I don't know. But yes, this is his less known one. Published in the 30s and 40s. I think there were 4 novels and 1 orphaned novella, because often he'd write it in short stories and novellas, and then kind of fix up. But there was some intention to bind them together. And so far fewer. I think Mars was 11 or 12. For instance, far fewer than Tarzan or Barsoom. They are about a person from Earth, Carson Napier, who basically, based on having heard the stories of John Carter, which have been passed down, creates a spaceship and wants to fly to Mars, and gets knocked off course and ends up on Venus. And it turns out Venus is habitable. There's a whole thing, they say that there could be no oxygen on Mars. It'd be incredibly high pressure, no vegetation, no oxygen, but it turns out as he crashes through a cloud layer, he crashes in trees. It turns out there is an ecosystem there and people there. And by the way, just to appreciate the good Pulp covers, both which I think are both mine are Foursquare from the New English Library. But yes, so there's a similar kind of thing going on to the John Carter books, that an Earthman goes to a distant planet in our solar system, and here it's a water planet rather than a desert planet, so it's got a different theme, great forests, great oceans, but very similar in terms of high action, high adventure, with a very heroic, manly hero who goes around doing heroic and manly things, and who gets into all kinds of hijinks and gets involved in the great politics and events of the day. One very fun thing, just very small but very fun, is at the very start, the prologue, to do with the guy who ends up, Carson Napier sends him telepathic communications about what he's doing. He explains this publisher explains why he was distracted at one point and didn't respond to the initial letter about Carson Napier's trip, because of the fact that his friends, including Tarzan, including Tarzan, had just returned from Pellucidar, the inner world. So we have here, this is, there's a world linking thing where all these, Tarzan's already linked to that, definitely, because he goes to Pellucidar. There is a novel, but here we get this and Mars tied into those. What happens in the rest, basically, these are, on the whole, pretty standard Sword and Planet Pulp novels. They're not as good as the best John Carter of Mars novels. There's one main reason, they're decent, I'll talk about that, but I'll just say the main reason that structurally they are weaker is that Burroughs always has a habit of switching between very fast-paced pulp action and kind of vivid, brief environmentals in a pulp style, and then saying, now let me explain about the universe and the science and the civilizations and the peoples. And he does that here, but he does it very often, and it does swing between the two. You get the sometimes overly frenetic pace for some people of the action of the story of things happening, and then you get a long explanation of what's going on and who these people are and stuff like that. And it is Burroughs expositing where he cannot tell the story organically. His particular writing style has perhaps degraded, but in a more general sense, perhaps he always struggles, I think it's fair to say, with organically, diegetically, as it were, just getting information over so that it seems important and relevant. Instead, you get lots of stuff at once. And it's often because our hero, John Carter or Carson Napier, is just telling us a bunch of stuff they found out. And that happens more. It means also that very often you are being told almost after the fact to care about exposition in terms of what's happening in the plot. So there can be a weakness there, that you get decent action, but it doesn't feel as weighty as with John Carter. in general, the action, the writing is good, the descriptions are good. Amtor Venus is described really interestingly. The animals are classically of whom you can see one on the front here with a big tongue, and a misrepresented eye. A creature doesn't have many eyes like that. It has just the one eye, on massive eye on the top of its head. But yes, there's this. The animals are great. The depictions of many things are very interesting. There is, in the second one, Lost on Venus, some very good stuff. Weird, dark, sciencey stuff about reanimating the dead and retaining their sentience in some way, in a way it's pretty unpleasant. And that's a strong bit. But that's just a structural problem. Is there's some really great writing, there's some really fun stuff, but structurally, his flaws show up more often. There is separately a different issue in Lost on Venus, which is that the first half consists of the escape of, or the first third consists of the escape and of our main character and the main heroine, but then the second half is, I think, I'm not sure what the original is called, but basically it involves going to two cities: the city of the dead, ruled by this mad scientist who's animating corpses and making them, they're semi-sentient, and so on, and it's all pretty grim, and that's where I described that's quite powerful. And the other side is this one good city of science where this guy's been exiled from, and he's a major score, he's a major villain, but this other city, Havatu, is really, there's a surprising complexity, but the main thing is that it is like a eugenics paradise. It's amazing. They've just eliminated bad genes. You're somewhat judged and corralled and so on your heredity, and future generations can suffer the death penalty because there's a 4 strikes and out, but it's on the bloodline over a certain period of time. And this is all this thing where it leads to a nearly utopian, idyllic society. Genuinely, that's how it's presented. Very positive, and I think I do. It's time. Do the various classes mingle to the extent of intermarrying? Of course. It is. Oh no! Well, no. Just before that, don't the soldiers take advantage of the familiarity to impose upon their officers? I asked. Why should they? The man says. They know their duties as well as the officers. Blah blah blah. I shook my head as I thought of the mess that Earthmen have made of government and civilization by neglecting to apply to the human race the simple rules which they observe to improve the breeds of dogs and cows and swine. This is deadly serious. This is Burroughs in 1933, just going along with the sort of like, maybe we should just scientifically breed humans and extirpate gene lines and so on to get good non-criminal gene lines who work hard and are loyal and clever. And he later in this series he does turn against the Nazis. No, I don't think I'm not sure if he ever said out loud, I think the Nazis are the best thing since sliced bread, but he does, before the Second World War, turn on them in the Amtor series, and I think he repents of some of that. But it's going to be natural that we read all the stuff about eugenics, especially with a quite militaristic, quite authoritarian, at least that's how things were, Utopia's established way of thinking about things in the context of that history. And maybe the eugenics won't bother all people that much. Eugenics has become much more popular in the last couple of decades than it was, but certainly the Nazism thing is not generally going to go down well. And it does seriously mar the second half of this book, because a major plot point, or a set of plot points, and so many of the things to do with the city of Havatu, which we've spent lots of time in that really matter, have to do with how good the eugenics program there is. And it is just a very serious flaw, I think, for me, because I was thinking, this just sounds mad and wicked, I thought. Your mileage may vary, but that was me. When in that second half of this book they weren't talking about that and they were doing other stuff, it was great. It was good. It was perfectly good. And there are interesting things where you can tell Burroughs and Carson, though they're saying, it's how amazing it is, can't reconcile themselves to this slightly mad system. That doesn't really seem... It seems very efficient, but there's not actually a way to line it up with any sense of natural justice in for Burroughs or Napier, at least. There we are. The first one has some decent high seas stuff with their special powerful ships. The second one has a good trek through a forest, as well as the stuff in the City of the Dead and the City of good Nazis. We see lots of the world. There is occasionally there's some other heavy-handed parody or satire of particularly of communism, and I think you're seeing stuff published around the time that Walter Duranty is going to the Soviet Union and lying his head off about how wonderful the things he's seeing are, rather than that there's a famine going on. So in that sense, maybe you might feel he strikes closer to the truth, but the point is it's still very heavy-handed. There's no subtlety or engagement with the ideas. It's Burroughs' philosophy at its lowest ebb compared to the often kind of simple but jolly and earnest and engaging stuff that happens in some of the Mars novels. With those caveats, I've enjoyed them. I will read the others at some point, I don't doubt, but they are, moderately serious caveats as to the second half of the second book at least. If you've read them, tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time.